That's what it is. And anything else you want to say to the fans?
I just want everybody to tune in Saturday night and put on a great show and a great performance regardless of who I fight. And shout out to DONTAE'S Boxing Nation, man. They're my people, man. They're good people.
DONTAE'S Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? I keep telling you, man, this is a great year of boxing, and it's just good for the boxing fans. But it's even better for Al Haymon and the PBC series. Because as you guys know by now, while other networks like HBO, they're doing major budget cuts, and we're not getting the matches that we want to get, fights like Nicholas Walters versus Lomachenko, that would have been on HBO, but HBO could not afford to put it on their network. We didn't get that fight. While they're struggling to pay for these fights to be aired on HBO, Al Haymon, the PBC series, and Showtime, they continue to ascend. I mean, just when you thought it was already going good for Al Haymon because the Porter versus Thurman fight, that fight did around 4 million views when it comes to peak numbers. Just when you thought it could not get any better for the PBC series, all of a sudden, Errol Spence versus Bundu trumps the Thurman Porter numbers, and they bring in a whopping 6 million views, according to BoxingScene.com. They're still tallying the numbers up, but this is a projected number. This is really great news for boxing fans. At least this is great news for boxing fans. I mean real boxing fans, not racist fans. I'm talking about boxing fans. This is great news. So the night that Errol Spence gets his biggest knockout, PBC does the biggest numbers. They beat their own record this year. And what's so crazy about it is Errol Spence, he wasn't even facing another Errol Spence, so to speak. He wasn't facing Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, Kell Brook, anyone like that. And he still drew in 6 million viewers. Just imagine if they continue to build an Errol Spence versus Thurman, Danny Garcia, or Porter fight, or even Adrian Broner. Imagine if they build that fight and put it on NBC. Once again, if Spence versus Bundu did 6 million, picture Spence versus Thurman in 2017 at the Barclays Center. Picture Thurman versus Garcia. Picture Spence versus Garcia. Spence versus Kell Brook. You're talking about 8 to 10 million views. Do you know how big that is? 6 million views is big as hell. 4 million views is big as hell. So you can only imagine how big those fights would be. You got Deontay Wilder. Imagine Deontay Wilder going up against Anthony Joshua. Imagine that fight being on free TV. Even if that fight was on Showtime, it would do some strong numbers. But if it was on free TV, you're talking about some ridiculous strong numbers, right? So right now, Al Haymon is in a very good situation, very good position, and it just keeps getting better and better. The news just keeps getting better and better. It's amazing when you look at the stark contrast. While the news just keeps getting better and better for Al Haymon and the PBC series, when it comes to HBO and Bob Arum Top Rank, the news just gets worse. I mean, now, who was their biggest star, Manny Pacquiao, they can't even afford to put Manny Pacquiao's fight on the network. And this is someone that has been with HBO for about 10 years. Guys, can you imagine Showtime telling Floyd Mayweather, that they're not going to put his fight on Showtime because they don't believe that it's going to do big enough numbers, and they already have another fight lined up for that month. Can you imagine Showtime telling Floyd that? It would never happen. It would never happen. I don't care what the circumstances are. It would never happen. And that is what HBO did when it came to Manny Pacquiao. And clearly they didn't do it because they don't like Manny Pacquiao. They did it because they truly believe, since they're already putting Ward versus Kovalev on pay-per-view, and Manny Pacquiao is facing an opponent that a lot of fans didn't want Pacquiao to fight, they believe that that fight is not going to sell. So they're choosing Kovalev and Ward, two fighters that have never been on pay-per-view. Two fighters that aren't superstars. They have more confidence in putting that fight on pay-per-view than putting Manny Pacquiao versus Jesse Vargas on pay-per-view. This is a really bad time for HBO and Bob Arum. Speaking of Bob Arum, when you hear that Bob Arum is upset that HBO decided to make a move like that, and even Bob Arum is saying, how can you guys turn your back on a guy that was loyal to HBO for 10 years or etc., etc. He says something on those lines. But when you hear Pacquiao's own promoter say that about HBO, you know it looks bad. You know it looks bad for HBO and Manny Pacquiao. So while the other side is dealing with a lot of turmoil, you have Al Heyman and the PBC series that continues to succeed. Once again, this is great news for the sport of boxing. Bringing boxing back to the masses. That is what PBC is doing right now, and it is working. You know, I have an older in-law. He's Italian. He's somewhere in his 60s, and he's one of them real casual boxing fans. Real casual. He doesn't really know any of the names. He doesn't really watch boxing like that. He'll watch boxing if it's on TV. But, he doesn't know the schedule of what fights are coming up, anything like that. But when he sees it come on, he really enjoys it. Well, there was a time when he stayed with me briefly for a couple of months. And, when he was here, he was able to watch all the fights that I had on my DVR, and we'll watch the fights. He's an old school cat. But what I found interesting is, because he's so casual, when he moved away and and got his own place, I was at home watching, what fight was I watching? Oh, it was the Thurman versus Porter fight. And I hadn't talked to him in a real long time, right? So I get a text from him, and he says to me as I'm watching the fight, boy, this Porter guy is a bad motherfucker, right? So the point that I'm making is, this is exactly the purpose of free TV boxing. This is what PBC is attempting to do. Bring these fights to the masses. Bring these fights to the casual fans that aren't subscribed to HBO or Showtime. That fan that could just flick through the regular national channels and find a good boxing match and say, oh wow, some boxing is on TV. That is the purpose. I told you guys on my last video when I was talking about PBC fights that I went to one of the local little fast food restaurants out here that actually had a TV in a restaurant, and I go in there, order my food, I turn around, look at the wall, and there it is. PBC boxing right on the TV at the restaurant. Something else that's really good about these free TV fights is, because it's on free TV, you're going to be able to access these fights at bars, restaurants, etc. So for fans that are new to seeing boxing on free TV, you go to your local bar and you see PBC boxing, you're like, oh wow, now they are bringing fights back to free TV. So now you're going to start checking the listings to see when the next fight is on free TV. Then these extreme casuals, like my in-law, who didn't know who Sean Porter was, now they know who these fighters are and they become more familiar with the names, right? this is how it works. This is exactly how it works. So congratulations to Al Heyman, the PBC series. Congratulations to Errol Spence, man. His first main event on NBC, and he does the best numbers this year. Right now, Errol Spence holds the record for the most watched fight this year. It's going to be pretty damn hard to beat that record. Now, before I end this video, I want you to keep in mind, remember what the racist fans were saying when Porter, Thurman numbers came out, when other numbers came out that were really good numbers. Remember what they were saying. They would basically always compare the numbers to PBC's biggest number ever, which was, I believe it was Thurman versus Guerrero that did like over 4 million, right? Whenever PBC put on a card and the numbers were below that number, they would always compare the numbers to the highest numbers ever and say, well, these numbers are not that good compared to Robert Guerrero versus Keith Thurman, which logically made no sense, because that's like saying every card on HBO was a disappointment because they didn't do as good as James Kirkland versus Canelo or Canelo versus James Kirkland. Because if you guys remember, that is the last time HBO, on regular HBO, they did well over 2 million views. Okay, so that's pretty much the logic they were using for why they didn't like Al Heyman in the PBC series, coincidentally. But now they can't even use that excuse. Why? Because now Errol Spence, he just trumped the Thurman versus Guerrero numbers. And guess what, guys? This is only the beginning. This is only the beginning of the PBC series. If we're seeing 6 million people tune in now, can you guys imagine how many people are going to be tuning in 3 years from now, 5, 10 years from now? Can you imagine how many people are going to be tuning in? So if you're a real boxing fan and not a decaf, you should be very elated to hear this news. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.